Hello! Hello, chat! How are y'all doing today? It's been a little bit since I have streamed. When was my last stream? It was... I want to say Monday? No, it wasn't Monday. I think it was Saturday, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I think I streamed on Saturday, and then I haven't streamed since then. So it's been a little bit. I figured we'd read the next chapter of The Stars and Their Children because Bones and the Bees, very talented author, and I love reading her stories. They're just mwah. Also, you like my choice of starting soon song? I figured since, you know, the fanfic, since the story is based in like otherworldly stuff, I figured Ancient Aliens was a good starting soon song. I'm ashamed that I didn't think of it sooner. But as always, before we get into the rest of the stream, God, I'm treating this like a YouTube video, goddamn. I always do that anyway. If there's any new viewers to the stream, be sure to leave a follow, cause at 150 followers, British accent stream. That's gonna be fun. Alright. Shall we get on with it? Oh! Before we do, I just remembered I wanted to tell a story before I read the chapter about about a weird dream that I had. The one stream I don't watch will be that one. That would make sense. But I had a really weird dream last night where I went to a Lovejoy gig in Brighton. But they were under the name, it was like Haymone or something like that. Like it was spelt like it was spelt like this. And another fake name gig, Poggies. So true. I had a dream where I went to one of their gigs in Brighton, but they were under the name Haymone. And I don't really remember the actual show itself. All I remember was that Wilbur Soot did a meet and greet at the end of the concert. But the thing is, like, so the line was like right next to, like, it kind of snaked around a curtain. It kind of reminded me of a doctor's curtain. Kind of see-through turquoise, but somehow I could, like, still see him, like, if he got close enough. And I saw that he was wearing, like, some kind of, like, turquoise, like, shirt or something. And, like, the round glasses. And nothing on his head. Like, it was just his hair. Oh, but the thing is, before I got in line, we all had to write our names down for if we were going to the meet and greet. And I wrote my dead name down first, and then I crossed it out, being like, shit. And I was like, I don't want people knowing my dead name. And so I put my preferred name. I think they actually maybe did another one. I can't remember if the vid I saw was the old one. No, they recently did a new one, but it wasn't under the name Haymone. I think it was like Abso Barbecue or something like that. So no, I didn't forget my own name. I just remembered that I didn't want people knowing my dead name. And so I get but the thing is I write down clay, but it's the pen runs out of ink a little bit when I write the Y, and I'm a perfectionist, so of course I had to finish the Y, but I didn't get to, so I just went in line anyway. And the thing is, like, it wasn't a Lovejoy meet and greet, at least it didn't look like it. I could only see Wilbur on the other side of the curtain, which was strange, but I went along with it anyway. Around the curtains changed color to white. I don't know. And Wilbur put on, I think he was still wearing like the round glasses, but he also put on a yellow sweater on top of his turquoise shirt, and put on a maroon beanie, much like his Minecraft skin, now that I'm thinking about it. Or actually no, his Minecraft skin doesn't have the beanie anymore. Maybe it did at one point, but I'm not too sure. Where did people even get the beanie from? Like, was it a part of his skin for a little bit? Or am I just making that up? I don't know. He's worn a version with a beanie. Okay. Good. So I'm not completely making it up. I take some pictures with him, and all of a sudden there's somebody there. It looks like Ash. I would assume it's Ash, but it didn't look like him in my dream. He looked taller. I don't know. We did some cool poses. Definitely a lot more picture. It was almost as if it was a paparazzi, like, photo shoot, rather than a meet and greet, one and done kind of thing, you know? We're done taking our pictures, and I'm about to leave, but then I just say, kind of just like casually, something about how this was like something along the lines of or maybe it wasn't, it was either Brighton or London that the concert was in, because Wilbur asked me if I've ever been here before, or like if like what my favorite thing about the place is, and I was like, oh, I don't really know much about London or Brighton or wherever. I only just got here recently to come see your concert. And and apparently that hit something in him or something. Like, I don't know what the phrase is, because he just started tearing up. I think it was like the prospect of somebody flying all the way from America to the UK just to see one of his shows that made him tear up. And so he, like, we got a few more pictures of just him and I'm just like kind of like struck a chord. That's the word. That phrase. Thank you. But usually struck a chord is in like a negative connotation, so I wasn't too sure. So we take more pictures. I'm like kind of like hugging him a little bit, and they're really wholesome and awe. I just remembered at the beginning, at the beginning of the photo shoot, when I go to take pictures with him, the first thing that I do as the pictures are starting to get taken is I look up to him to see where like his head is, and I go, Jesus Christ. Because I am 5'6", and he is like a whole foot taller than me. Yeah, that's all I wanted. Like, that was if I see him, I will scream. Me too. Okay, I think that was all about the, not out of excitement, but fear. So true. Yeah, I think that was all that happened in my dream. That's all I remember, at least. on to the rest of the stream. I've been sat here for 15 minutes talking about that. Okay, not a full 15 minutes, but you know what I mean. Alright. The Stars and Their Children by Bones and the Bees. Chapter 7, Out with the Old and In with the New. So what happened in the previous chapter? Wilbur and Tommy are trying to get accustomed to their asylum on, the Antarctic, on Zephyrus 4. Okay, I haven't watched any other Fig Bots, so I'm starting here. Or should I wait? No, it's fine. I'll try to give, like, a little recap. Yeah, Tommy and Wilbur are trying to get used to their, like, new life, I guess, on Zephyrus 4. It has its ups and downs. The negotiations meeting got postponed a lot more because of the fact that, like, word has now spread to the rest of the galaxy, basically, about, about Wilbur and Tommy seeking asylum on Zephyrus 4. And they now need to attend this meeting with Emperor Philza, to discuss with other planets, like, the next course of action, I guess? I'm not too sure. It's been a while since I read this. Let's see. Okay, it doesn't look like there's any trigger warnings for this chapter, so that's good. Summary. The leaders arrive for the conference. Okay, yeah, it's a conference. Let's see. Tomorrow we will see the arrival of 10 representatives from 6 different planets, Philza told them, folding his hands in front of him. It had been 2 days since Philza had first informed them about the upcoming conference. Since that day, Wilbur had been extending Tommy's reading list, while also trying to brush up on foreign policy himself. Except until now, Philza hadn't told them exactly who would be showing up. He claimed this was because he wasn't sure exactly who was going to be able to make the conference on such short notice, but Wilbur couldn't help but wonder if he did it specifically so they wouldn't have enough time to research the planets beforehand. They were sitting in the negotiations room that Wilbur was already starting to loathe. Tommy was squirming uncomfortably beside him, his nerves visible in the way he was bouncing his leg under the table. It was one thing to go to the leader of an empire and beg him to grant you asylum when your life was on the line, but it was another to actually meet planetary leaders in a diplomatic setting and insert yourself into the heart of political games. Again, it was nearly impossible to find information regarding the Antarctic Empire from outside resources. Wilbur had no clue how many planets were under Antarctic rule. All he knew was that it was a steadily increasing number that had worried the entire galaxy. At least until Dream took over the SMP Empire and everyone's focus shifted to him instead. He wondered if he could recognize the names of any of the planets that were going to arrive at Zephyrus 4, or if they would all be completely unfamiliar to him. He hoped for familiarity. He hoped to find some kind of footing along this ever-shifting sea of power plays and careful words he found himself constantly slipping in. He hoped that for at least one day, he might not be completely lost as to what he was supposed to do next. Which planets will be there? Wilbur asked, leaning back in his seat. The first is one you probably haven't heard of, Philza began, stretching his wings out behind him. It's a smaller planet located in the outer sector called Serenity. Wilbur furrowed his brows. He wasn't familiar with the name. Seeing the confusion on his face, Philza continued. They're not particularly known for anything save for their agricultural exports, but they're an extremely useful planet that we use as an outpost to keep an eye on the outer sector. Alright, who else? Tommy cut in, still bouncing his leg. Mantle. The name rings a bell, but I'm not sure I've heard it from, Wilbur told him, tilting his head to the side. They're not technically a planet, but a moon to a gas giant, Technoblade explained, fiddling with the rings on his fingers. They figured out a way to harvest the gas from their gas giant and turn it into energy. Got rich off of it, so they're big players in the galaxy-wide economy as a whole. Huh. Interesting. Wilbur nodded. Who next? Well, Philza smirked. Are you familiar with Kinoko Kingdom? Beside him, Tommy stiffened, while Wilbur's eyes widened. While Eldingvegger never had much in the way of direct relations with Kinoko Kingdom, Wilbur knew enough about them to know they were a very wealthy planet with plenty of influence on the larger galaxy. He completely forgot that they had been put under Antarctic rule several years earlier. That was a foolish thing for him to forget, especially given their current situation. You took over the planet a few years ago, right? Wilbur asked after a few moments, trying to hide the surprise on his face. We did. Technoblade nodded. Those mushrooms they export provide a lot of profit for us. Yes. Wilbur remembered learning about the hallucinogenic properties of several mushroom species found only on Kinoko. They were sought after for the feelings of euphoria they could produce, along with intense visions that some believed led to spiritual experiences. Extremely popular all throughout the galaxy, although Wilbur had never gotten the opportunity to try them himself. Not that he'd want to either. The idea of having visions of things that weren't actually there terrified him. He'd rather stay grounded in reality, thank you very much. So you got Kinoko, Serenity, and Mantle. What are the other three planets? Tommy pushed, clearly not eager to let the conversation drift. The next three planets are, well, they're three moons that are separate from one another, but they all orbit the same gas giant. Kylus and operate under one government, Philza explained, his smile fading. These planets are not under Antarctic rule, but they are allied with us. We will be hosting 2 representatives from each planet. Collectively, they're known as the Badlands. Technoblade continued when Philza finished. Individually, though, you have Nona, Decima, and Morta. The Badlands. Now that was a name Wilbur was familiar with. Although he didn't know much about the planets themselves, he remembered a period of time where Eret was checking the maps every single day to see if the Badlands had fallen under Asempi rule. Apparently, the Badlands were in rather close proximity to the heart of Asempi's capital planet, which he could more than imagine was a primary reason Philza chose to ally with them. I'm familiar with the Badlands, although we haven't had any direct discussions with them before, Wilbur said, folding his hands in his lap. So you've told all of those representatives that Tommy and I are here? I have. They're aware of the situation on Eldingvegger and that you have come to me requesting aid. He leaned further back in his seat, readjusting the thin metal circlet on his hair. However, I believe all of them will be interested in hearing that directly from you both. And he was going to be discussing his own plans for their negotiations with the leaders under his rule. Wilbur wasn't going to forget that part of it. Despite being the Emperor, Philza seemed to be open to debate and conversation with the planets that were under his rule. That meant the leaders they were meeting would have Phil's ear. Slowly, a plan began to form in his mind. Can you tell us anything more about the leaders we'll be meeting tomorrow? Wilbur then questioned. You'll find out for yourself soon enough, Philza said, pinning Wilbur down with a knowing stare. You're not going to find out anything I don't want you to know, is what his eyes said while his mouth stayed still. Wilbur met his eyes as evenly as he could. Fine, that's more than enough to play your game with, is what Wilbur silently replied with. There wasn't much more to discuss in the meeting after that, and since Philza wasn't willing to share information on the actual leaders until they arrived, that meant they were soon dismissed. Wilbur walked back to his bedroom with his hand on Tommy's shoulder, the plan slowly developing in his mind like fog dissipating over an ocean. By the time they got back to their room, Wilbur was buzzing with energy. As soon as the door shut behind them both, Wilbur let go of Tommy and began to pace around the room, raking his fingers through his hair as his thoughts bounced around his mind. Okay, he began, drawing his little brother's attention before he could even sit on the bed. We need to have a game plan going into this. Got it? I thought we were just going to be telling them what happened on Eldingvega. Why would we need a plan for that? Tommy asked, frowning at Wilbur. Come on, Tommy, I want you to think about it. Phil's inviting these leaders over to discuss Eldingvega. Not just what happened, but what he's going to be doing about it, Wilbur explained, walking from one wall and turning around to go to the other. And not everyone coming is going to be under the rule of the Empire. The Badlands are only allied with them, remember? I still don't get where you're going with this, Tommy said, huffing as he plopped down on the edge of the bed. Wilbur stopped pacing to meet Tommy's eyes. Philza needs to get approval on his negotiation plans with us. At that, Tommy's eyes widened. Wait, are you sure? Why would he need permission? He cut himself off, gasping as the realization hit him. The Badlands! He needs permission from his allies. If he has any sort of military agreement with the Badlands, which I imagine he does since that's literally 3 whole planets worth of soldiers, then he's going to have to get approval from them if he's going to send any kind of army to Eldingvega, Wilbur continued, giving Tommy an expectant look. It was as if Wilbur could almost see the puzzle pieces falling into place in Tommy's mind. And he would need them to approve whether he's just going to chase out the SMP army, or if he's going to fully take Eldingvega for himself. And that means if we want to find a way to convince him not to put the Blazafane trade under full Empire rule, then our best shot is to try and get the Badlands to not agree to it, Wilbur told him, throwing out his arms dramatically as he finished. There was a beat as Tommy stared at him, pale brows scrunched together as he worked something out in his mind. But how are we supposed to do that? Tommy then asked. Wilbur's arms lowered, his thoughts slowing as he viewed the obstacle in his mind. There were several ways they could go about that. There was always the possibility of them striking a deal with the Badlands in secret, but their only bargaining chip would be something akin to give them lower prices for Blazafane, which was something Philza would be able to do if he were in charge of the trade instead, so that wouldn't work. There was also the possibility of trying to instill a lack of confidence in Philza as a leader to the Badlands, to try and convince them the Blazafane trade would be destroyed under his rule, but Wilbur had no idea how they could even try to do that, so it wouldn't work either. 1 second, drink break. There we go. It's going to need to be something we're very careful about, Wilbur began, picking up the pace once more. I think our best option is going to be to try and balance the perception the other leaders have of you. You need to be sympathetic. You're 15 and were just violently deposed from your position as Crown Prince to the throne of Eldingvega. You're traumatized and just want the opportunity to go home again. They need to feel bad for you, but you can't be too weak and helpless, or else they'll think it would be better for Filza to step in and rule Eldingvega for you. We need to show you as a competent leader to be who is the best fit to continue ruling the Blazophane trade, not just because it's your birthright, but because you deserve it. Resting his chin on a pillow, Tommy frowned. I thought appealing to the emotional side of politics never worked. Usually it doesn't, Wilbur agreed, still wearing a hole into the floor with his walking. But there's no real benefit in terms of profit or alliances that come with you retaining control instead of Filza, so we can't negotiate with that. I think our only option here is going to be to try and provoke sympathy from the other leaders. Will, I don't know as much about politics as you, but even I can tell it's a pretty shit idea, Tommy pointed out. People are more flawed than you realize, Tommy, Wilbur argued. Emotions have won out over logic millions of times throughout history. It's just about knowing what kind of emotions will elicit the response you want. I get what you're saying, but I don't think it's that simple, Tommy pushed, wrapping his arms tighter around his pillow. Yeah, emotions can win out over logic. Duh, we fucking know that. But you can't always predict how emotions might make someone react. Like, even if we do make someone feel sympathetic for me, that doesn't automatically mean they're gonna be on our side. But it's worth a shot though, don't you think? Tommy shrugged. I guess so. He paused, biting his lip as he thought it over. I mean, I guess people like to feel like they're the hero in any given situation. Like, they want to feel as if they're the one helping someone out. So if we can figure out how to make someone feel like they're helping us by convincing Filza not to take over the Blazophane trade, we can get them to do exactly that. Wilbur finished for him, staring at Tommy with a wide smile. Shit, that might actually work then. I mean, we still gotta figure out how the fuck we can make someone feel like that, Tommy said, still frowning. That's not that hard. You just gotta try and be sympathetic, but also look like you know what you're doing. You need to make them like you, Wilbur reassured him, walking over to the bed now. Say that like it's easy, Tommy scoffed. Stopping in front of the bed, Wilbur placed his hands on Tommy's shoulders and bent down so they were eye to eye. That should be so easy for you, Tommy. You had practically everyone on Eldingvega wrapped around your finger. I did? Wilbur stared blankly at his little brother for a moment, lines of confusion crinkling up around the corners of his eyes. Tommy was looking at him as if he'd grown 3 heads, and Wilbur didn't understand. Of course Tommy had the entire palace wrapped around his finger. They practically worshipped the kid. Do you really not know the effect you have on people? Wilbur whispered, frowning at him. They liked me because I was the crown prince, Tommy said slowly, enunciating each word with the kind of care you would say to someone who might not be able to understand them. Did Tommy really not know? Of course they liked you for that, but that wasn't the only reason, Wilbur explained, squeezing his shoulders to try and get him to understand. Sure, you can be annoying as shit sometimes, but if you're actually trying, everyone who meets you treats you like you're their son or their little brother. There's something about you that's just, I don't know, endearing, I suppose? At this, Tommy scoffed and rolled his eyes. Don't bullshit me, Will. I'm loud, rude, obnoxious. And you're also funny and compassionate and excitable. Wilbur cut in, giving him a pointed look. If you're not actively trying to piss people off, then they'll do just about anything for you. That's not true. If I'm so fucking likeable, why did Eric try to have me killed? Tommy challenged, something cracking in his voice. Wilbur winced. Eric, they're a different story. They've known you since you were born, so they're more immune to that side of you. You've known me since I was born, though. I'm your brother. It's different, Wilbur said, letting go of Tommy's shoulders and sitting beside him on the bed. I'm here to love you even when you're being an obnoxious little shit. All that didn't make the frown on Tommy's face lessen. He slumped into Wilbur's side anyway. I still think you're wrong. You're the one who knows how to make people like you, not me. Wilbur huffed. I can charm people, but it's different from what you do. You're genuine, and people can tell. He tried to explain, wrapping an arm around Tommy's shoulders to give him a side hug. Besides, the leaders don't need to like me at all, so that's a moot point. This is gonna be all you. There was a beat as Tommy took a breath, considering Wilbur's words. He tossed his pillow to the side and pulled his knees up to his chest. What if I play up to the fact that my dad's dead and the throne to Elding Vega is kind of the last thing I have from him? Tommy offered, looking up at Wilbur hopefully. A slow grin spread over Wilbur's face. That's brilliant. I knew you'd be a natural at this. Even though uncertainty was still dancing in Tommy's eyes, his small smile was genuine all the same. The next day, Wilbur and Tommy found themselves waiting in the Emperor's throne room for the visitors to arrive. Philza was sitting on his throne like he had been the first day they arrived. His wings were spread out behind him, the dark feathers glossy as could be as if they had been freshly preened. The front strands of his blonde hair had been braided back, with his metal circlet resting right above the carefully woven strands. Somehow, his eyes seemed even closer to the color of ice than usual, and Wilbur felt as though shards of that ice were slipping under his skin every time he met the Emperor's gaze. Beside him, Technoblade was every inch the terrifying imperator he had looked the first day Wilbur and Tommy were introduced to him. The coat he wore that fell to his mid-calves was the same that it always was, save for the fact that the silver embroidery around the seams was much more intricate and noticeable than before. He stood with his shoulders straight and braids falling down his back, while his gold eyes darted around the room, more alert than Wilbur had ever seen him before. One second, I need a Listerine patch. My throat's getting sore already. That's better. Whew. Wilbur and Tommy stood off to the side of the throne, hands folded behind their backs as they waited for the doors to slide open. It was eerily reminiscent of the dozens of times the two of them would stand in Eric's throne room, patiently waiting for the first guest to be presented to them all. From the corner of his eye, Wilbur watched Tommy. His shoulders were back, his posture just as perfect as Eric always reminded him to keep it. He was going to be on his best behavior today, and while he did his best to charm the leaders, Wilbur was going to be doing what he could to gain information about all of them. They were a team. As long as both of them played their parts, they could take full advantage of the opportunity being handed to them. It had only been a few minutes since they all assumed their positions when the doors first opened. Puffy led the way inside the throne room, her dark skirt swishing around her boots with every step. She bowed deeply to Filza, her horns poking out from her curls as they fell over her face. When she straightened back up, she pushed them back again and met Filza's steady gaze. "Your Majesty," she greeted, before turning to Technoblade. "Your Imperial Highness, our guests have arrived." "Then bring them in here," Filza said, with a wave of his hand. Nodding, Puffy took a few steps back so she was in the doorway. Then, she gestured for someone to come forward. The first person to step into the room was a man. He had long dark hair tied back into a loose ponytail at the nape of his neck, and a scruffy beard around his cheeks and neck. He was dressed in all black. Black shirt, black coat, black harness over the shirt and jacket, and gave Filza a short bow in greeting. "May I present Michael McChill, Chancellor of Serenity," Puffy introduced. "A pleasure to see you, Your Majesty, and Your Imperial Highness," Michael said as he straightened up from his bow. Filza gave him a nod of acknowledgement. "Pleasure to see you as well, Chancellor." With that, Michael moved off to the side, standing next to Puffy as she waved for the next person to enter. This time, 2 people entered instead of 1. The first one was a young woman dressed in an intricate black and red coat that was clipped above her chest and fell to her ankles, with a short red and black dress underneath of it that fell to her mid-thighs. She also wore ankle boots with a tall, square heel, a sharp contrast to the military boots everyone else here seemed to sport. The most eye-catching part of her attire, though, was the black crown-like halo she wore on top of her long dark hair, the headpiece shooting out like sun rays in the shape of a circle above her braided bun. Beside her, there was a man wearing a red cloak that fell to his knees. It was intricately embroidered with black and gold stitching, creating a design of flowers and mushrooms all around it. He also wore a gold circlet in his light brown hair, and Wilbur noticed his eyes were such a bright shade of gold. They were almost the same color as Techno's. That wasn't the unusual part about his eyes, though. Yes, they were gold, but they also weren't focused on anything. He was staring off into space. A look of wonder cast over his expression as he stared not at Filza and Technoblade, but at a plain stone pillar. "May I present Princess Tina, Duchess of Atramentaria, and Marquis Carl Amanita Jacobs, seer of the Church of the Other and the In-Between." Or is it Marquise? I know Marquis is French, so... but that's not with an E. I think in this sense it would be Marquise. Doesn't sound right, though. "Your Majesty, Your Imperial Highness," Tina greeted as she curtsied at both Filza and Technoblade. There was a beat of silence as everyone waited for Carl to greet them both. Tina glanced at him from the corner of her eye, elbowing his side and making him jump. "Your Majesty, Your Imperial Highness, hi," Carl said slowly. Oh, slowly. That was supposed to be. Who cares? Still struggling to focus his gaze as he bowed to them both. "Your walls are so pretty. They're made of the most beautiful rainbow crystal, and he's currently straddling the line of the Other and the In-Between at the moment," Tina cut in, giving them both an apologetic smile. "That's perfectly understandable," Filza reassured, smiling back at her. "Sia, I regret to inform you our walls are not actually made of rainbow crystal. but I hope you enjoy your time here all the same. Carl's attention seemed to have already wandered away from Philza, his eyes once again roaming the walls. After a few beats of silence, his golden gaze fell onto Wilbur and Tommy, and he let out a sharp gasp. "It's you two!" he whispered, bringing a hand up to his mouth. I've seen you both before!" He let out a high-pitched giggle, while Tina grabbed his arm to hold him back. "Wow, this means things are going to get pretty exciting for you all very soon." Wilbur had no idea what he was talking about, and neither did Tommy, judging by the way he looked like he was frozen in place. Philza and Technoblade didn't seem bothered by his strange words, though, while Tina seemed tired more than anything else. "Come on, Carl. We can talk about that stuff later," Tina whispered to him, leading him off to the side where Michael was standing. Carl nodded, but didn't tear his eyes away from Wilbur and Tommy. The brothers did their best to ignore him, but his gaze was like a physical weight on Wilbur's shoulders. For some reason, Wilbur had the strangest sense he could see straight through him if he wanted to. Coughing to clear her throat, Puffy took a breath before waving the next person in. Or rather, people. "May I present the Council of the Badlands, Councilors Sam and Ponk of Decima, Councilors Bad Boy Halo and Skeppy of Morta, and Councilors Antfrost and CPK of Nona." The council entered in order of their introductions as Wilbur held his breath, eager to try and take in as much information about the Badlands as he could. The first two that entered, Sam and Ponk, looked entirely human. The man he guessed was Sam had green hair the color of a forest, and eyes that were such a dark shade of brown they almost seemed black. Ponk's nearly white hair contrasted sharply with their darker skin, and Wilbur noticed that one of their arms was metallic, looking as though it were made of a mix between gold and silver. The two of them wore similarly cut coats that fell to their knees. Ponk's was embroidered with silver stitching, and Sam's was embroidered with gold. Along with that, both of them had metal masks covering the lower halves of their faces, Sam's being pure gold, and Ponk's being bright red. Next, Wilbur assumed the two that entered were Bad Boy Halo and Skeppy, and neither of them were anything even close to human. Bad was impossibly tall, even taller than Rambu, and he wore a black and red hooded cloak that fell to the floor, pooling in rich piles of fabric around his ankles. His face was shrouded in shadow by the hood, showing only a pair of glowing white eyes in the darkness. In contrast, while Skeppy wore a similar cloak in shades of blue and silver, his hood was pulled back so his face was visible. While he seemed human at first glance, Wilbur quickly picked up on the bright clusters of turquoise crystals that grew out of his skin in different patches, and recalled hearing something about a gem-like species that rarely left their home planet. Lastly, Antfrost and CPK entered. Neither one of them was human either. In fact, Antfrost, at least, was actually the furthest you could get from being a human, Wilbur was fairly certain. The best way he could think to describe it was that Antfrost was a human-sized cat walking on two legs, while CPK looked more human-like, save for the fox ears sticking out of his ears and the orange tail that was swishing behind him. They both wore coats that fell to their hips, decorated with swirling shades of copper against black fabric. All of the council lined up in a row in front of Philza's throne, bowing with surprising coordination. Wilbur wondered if they rehearsed that, and judging by the relieved look on Antfrost's face as they straightened back up, he was pretty sure it was. Sam, Ponk, Bad, Skeppy, Antfrost, it's good to see all of you again, Philza said, nodding to each of the council. Then, his gaze fell on the Foxman, Councilor CPK, I don't believe we've met before. Oh no, I can't do CBK's voice. Please, please don't make him speak. I don't know his accent that well. Oh dear God. CBK is a new member of the council, Sam explained, gesturing to him. CBK seemed startled at being directly addressed, but quickly bowed. It's a pleasure to meet you. Emperor Filza and Imperator Technoblade. I look forward to working with you both. He didn't say Your Majesty, and that made both Wilbur and Tommy raise their eyebrows. But none of the other council members blinked twice, and Filza didn't seem all that bothered by the omission of proper title either. I look forward to working with you as well, Filza said, dipping his head in respect. Punk, is the arm new? Punk glanced down at their metal arm, their brows furrowing before their gaze flitted up to Filza. Yes, it's new. There was an accident back on Decima, they answered after a beat, and Wilbur noticed how beside them, Sam seemed to shrink in on himself. Interesting. For the first time since the instructions began, Technoblade spoke up. Is that Sam's craftsmanship? This made Sam flinch, while Punk refused to look in his direction. You could say that. An icy silence fell over the group. Tommy shifted awkwardly from foot to foot, and Wilbur elbowed him in the side to get him to stop. After a few beats, Puffy cleared her throat again, and the council took that as their cue to move and stand beside the others. Then, she repositioned herself back in the doorway, and gestured for the last of the leaders to enter. A single man staggered his way inside the throne room. He was an OV with large horns curling out of dark brown hair above his ears. His steps were uneven, and there were deep bags under his eyes, as if he hadn't gotten a good night's sleep in weeks. Along with that, he was the most heavily clothed out of everyone, wearing several layers of thick wool fabric, along with a black cloak that nearly brushed the floor, and a puff of brown animal fur around the collar. Chains also rattled with every step he took, and Wilbur could see steel and silver jewelry dripping off of both his cloak and his hands. May I present President J. Texas Schlatt of Mantle, Puffy introduced, her politeness sounding far more forced this time around than it had been for any of the other leaders. Immediately, Wilbur knew he didn't like Schlatt. His bow was sloppy, and he was breathing like he'd just run across the entire palace. It was probably the weight of all his clothes and jewelry. Even a single step in that getup, he had to be like lifting weights. Your Majesty, Your Imperial Highness, I must say you're both looking pretty damn great, Schlatt greeted, giving both Filza and Technoblade a sly grin. Filza didn't smile back. Schlatt? Seems you won the re-election. Sure did. What, you surprised? Schlatt asked, raising an eyebrow at him. A little bit, considering you were dealing with those protests a few months back. Technoblade drawled, giving Schlatt a flat stare. Schlatt snorted. Those? Nah, those weren't a big deal. Sometimes when you do what you gotta do, it makes some waves, you know? I suppose so, Filza acquiesced, leaning back in his seat. Either way, congratulations on winning. Thanks. Glad to be back, Schlatt replied, grinning as he waltzed over to join the others. With that, Puffy stepped further into the throne room, and the door slid shut behind her. Wilbur presumed this meant Schlatt was the last of the leaders to arrive, and if that was the case, then the meetings would begin very soon. Once the doors had shut, Philza shifted so he was standing up. His wings stretched out behind him like living shadows, his icy gaze skimming over the leaders gathered in front of his throne, the barest hint of a smile playing at the corners of his lips. I'm very grateful you all were able to make it here on such short notice. I'm fucking up his accent. I'm very grateful you all were able to make it here on such short notice. As we've said over our calls, we are living in a very tumultuous period, and there's quite a bit for us to go over. But before we dive into our discussions, I have 2 introductions to make of my own. Wilbur's heart leapt into his throat when Philza turned to look at both him and Tommy. He held out a clawed hand, gesturing for the 2 to walk to the front of the throne room. Tommy gave him a nervous glance, but Wilbur nodded, encouraging him to go first. Straightening his shoulders, Tommy walked to the front of the room, with Wilbur trailing close behind. He felt the eyes of the other leaders lingering on him, skimming over both their faces, searching their expressions for any clues to their thoughts. Wilbur did his best to keep his face neutral, while Tommy attempted to do the same. Boys, would you care to introduce yourselves? Philza asked, giving them both pointed looks. This time, Tommy didn't need to be reminded that he had to go first. My name is Theseus Thomas Ione, Crown Prince Veldingvega, he introduced, bowing to the group. Then, the eyes shifted to Wilbur, and he could already feel the questions lingering in their stares. I'm Orpheus Wilburcity, Prince of Veldingvega. When he straightened up from his own bow, he could see Tina furrowing her brows as she glanced between the 2 of them, with Michael doing the same. Meanwhile, the Council of the Badlands were giving them varying looks of sympathy, while Schlatt was smirking like Philza had when he asked Wilbur if he was a bastard. Lastly, Carl wasn't even looking at the 2 of them, and instead was staring with wide eyes at the wall once again. The princes have requested asylum from the Antarctic Empire, so they have been staying here for the past week. They'll be joining us for many of our discussions, especially regarding the situation on Eldingvega. Shouldn't it just be their heir that joins us? Schlatt asked, dark eyes focused on Tommy. Don't see why the other one's gotta be there. Wilbur fought the urge to curl his hand into a fist. I am my brother's advisor, so I will be in attendance at any and all discussions he is a part of, he explained, his voice tight. You say advisor, I say babysitter, Schlatt muttered under his breath. To his left, Michael shot Schlatt a dirty look. Don't be a dick. Tommy's face twisted into a scowl, and he opened his mouth to respond, but Wilbur elbowed him sharply in the side before he could say anything. When Tommy glanced at him, Wilbur shook his head. They couldn't afford to let Tommy's temper get the better of him so early into their first time talking to the other leaders. Although Tommy clearly wanted to argue, after a few beats, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Still, he kept shooting daggers at Schlatt with his eyes, and Wilbur was just glad Schlatt seemed too stupid to notice it. Alright, now that we got the formal stuff out of the way, we should probably get the business stuff started. Technoblade cut in before Schlatt could make any more rude remarks. Philza nodded. Agreed. Let's make our way over to the negotiations room. At this, Puffy opened the doors to the throne room once more. They all filed out behind her, Wilbur and Tommy being some of the last to leave, with only Philza and Technoblade following them. As they all moved as a group down the hall towards the negotiations room, Wilbur kept his arm tightly looped with Tommy's. Neither one said anything, but they were both stiff as could be, and Wilbur could practically feel the anxiety bouncing off of Tommy. The other leaders began to make their way into the negotiations room. Before Tommy and Wilbur could step inside, though, 2 large hands settled on each of their shoulders. Try to ignore Schlatt if you can. Nearly everyone here hates the guy, Technoblade whispered to both him and Tommy. Then suddenly, Philza was on Wilbur's other side, not touching his shoulder, but leaning close to his ear all the same. It's true. He's a fucking prick, he agreed, rolling his eyes. Also, you're gonna be really confused by pretty much anything Carl says. Just go with it. None of us ever know what the fuck he's talking about. Guess that comes with the territory of being able to see the future, Technoblade huffed, before dropping his hands from both their shoulders and stepping away from them. Philza did the same, gesturing at the door for the brothers to go first. Wilbur was reeling over the fact that Philza and Technoblade both had just casually given them advice. No games, no power plays. Of course, this could be an attempt at tricking them again, but it seemed too simple for that. No, for some reason, Wilbur got the sense this wasn't part of their games. The 2 men simply wanted to share a bit of advice with them and nothing more. With his thoughts spinning wildly in his head, Wilbur made his way inside the negotiations room, with Tommy looking just as bewildered as Wilbur felt. The others had already taken their seats, leaving only 4 chairs on one side of the table open. Wilbur and Tommy sat down, with Tommy sitting between Wilbur and Sam, while Wilbur was settled next to the 2 open seats he was certain Philza and Technoblade were going to take. Sure enough, a few moments later, the men sat down in the last 2 chairs, and of course, Technoblade sat beside Michael, while Philza sat right next to Wilbur. To say it was strange to sit right beside the Emperor he'd only either sat across from or seen on a throne was an understatement. It felt wrong to nearly be shoulder to shoulder with the man who had outright threatened him and Tommy several times at this point. His wings were stretched out behind him, with one of the wings extending far past Wilbur's chair and even going past Tommy's. He didn't like it. The wings behind him kept wrestling with every small movement, and it made Wilbur feel like he was being trapped. Even though he didn't feel a single feather brush his back or shoulders, the phantom sensation was there, as if Philza was wrapping his wings around both him and Tommy to declare to the others that they were under his control. Gritting his teeth, Wilbur straightened up in his seat and pointedly tried not to look in Philza's direction. Beneath the table, he squeezed Tommy's hand and breathed a small sigh of relief when Tommy squeezed back. All right. I'm sure you're all quite tired from your journeys here, so today's meeting won't take up too much of your time, Philza began, folding his hands in front of him. I figured it would make the most sense for Prince Orpheus and Prince Theseus here to go over the events of what occurred on Eldingvega, so that we might be better equipped to discuss our next courses of action over the following days. Immediately, Tommy stiffened as Wilbur tried to hide a wince. Philza had told them they would want to know what happened on Philza had told them that they would want to know what happened on Eldingvegr. This was something he'd been expecting. Still, that didn't make it any easier to talk about. Once again, the rule of Tommy needing to be the one to speak first was ingrained into Wilbur's head. He stayed silent as Tommy took a shaky breath, clearly trying to figure out how best to word the nightmarish events of those few days. I'll try to, not get too rambly with this, Tommy began, blinking fast as he struggled to focus his gaze on one person. Take your time, and just explain it as best you can, Sam then said in a surprisingly gentle voice. Tommy nodded, closing his eyes as he took another breath. His grip on Wilbur's hand was painful, but Wilbur didn't make a single move to pull away. To put it bluntly, we were betrayed, Tommy told the group, keeping his eyes fixed on the center of the table. Eret, the King Regent, who was supposed to rule until he turned 18, decided they actually didn't want to hand the throne over. They wanted to stay as the head of Eldingvega, so they made a deal with Emperor Dream without mine or my brother's knowledge. A deal? Tina questioned, frowning at them both. Yes. A deal to make Eldingvega part of the Asempi Empire, and in turn, Dream would keep them as permanent king. Tommy explained, lifting his head up just a bit. Originally, they were just told that Dream was going to exile us from the planet, but once the invasion actually began, Dream decided he wanted to execute both me and Orpheus instead. He wanted to execute children? Bad asked, sounding incredulous. Are you really that surprised, Bad? Aunt Frost said, his ears twitching. It's Dream. He's done way worse than just executing kids. Yeah, like ruin the environments of entire planets. Tina muttered bitterly, picking at her nails. Wait, sorry to interrupt. Michael jumped in, straightening up in his seat. I don't mean to, question you guys, since this was obviously a really fucked up thing that happened, but how do you even know this? You said that Eret originally thought Dream was just gonna exile you. How did you find that out? The question hung in the air, Tommy shrinking back in his seat as he no doubt flashed back to the crawl space. Wilbur's own heartbeat picked up thinking back to it, remembering the way Eret and Dream's voices echoed off the thin walls. How Tommy was desperately clutching the back of his shirt and struggling to muffle the sound of his breathing. Wilbur glanced at Tommy. He knew his little brother well enough that he could tell Tommy didn't want to answer this. Didn't want to have to detail the crawl space or the running or any of it. But the others wanted answers. It was a valid question to ask after all. If I may answer this for my brother, Wilbur said, after several long moments of silence, taking a deep breath to try and calm his pounding heart. When the invasion began, we found a place to hide to avoid Dream's soldiers. It was a small crawl space behind a wall we used to play in as children, so we hid ourselves in there. Dream and Eret had a conversation in the room right outside the crawl space, where they discussed the details of their plans, including Dream revealing his plan to execute us both. The wall was, thin enough to overhear them both. I need water. 1 second. Maybe even another Listerine patch. God damn. 1 second. Gotta let it dissolve. Whew. One thing I keep forgetting about these things is that the mintiness goes up to your nose. It's like when fizzy drinks, tickle your nose. It's like that. A heavy silence smothered the table after Wilbur finished speaking. Sam, Bad, Skeppy, CPK, Ponk, and Aunt Frost were staring at the two of them with blatant horror. Schlatt could have fallen asleep in his chair for all Wilbur knew. Tina and Michael both seemed troubled at this, while Carl was nodding solemnly, as if he'd already known the story before Wilbur told it. "How did you escape?" Ponk asked, their voice low. Tommy pushed up in his chair again at this. Had to wait for the winds to die down again, which they did after about 3 days of us staying in the crawl space. Then we pretty much just ran to the hangar, stole a shuttle, and flew to Zephyr's 4. 3 days. Technoblade murmured, staring at his hands with a deep frown. It was then Wilbur realized that he and Tommy never told Philza and Technoblade the details of their escape. They had given them both an overview, but the specifics of how things happened never came up. To his right, Philza's expression was unreadable. There was a crease between his brows, but he didn't seem upset like Sam or Bad clearly were. Instead, he was again giving Wilbur that look like he was some kind of puzzle for him to figure out, as if he was trying to unspool Wilbur's thoughts just by staring intently at him. You mentioned something about winds, Tina suddenly cut in, startling Wilbur out of his thoughts. What do you mean that you had to wait for the winds to die down before you could escape? Oh, right. There wasn't much reason for outsiders to learn about Eldingvegar's unique planetary conditions unless they were visiting it themselves. Eldingvega as a planet is tidally locked, Wilbur began, forgetting that he had to technically wait for Tommy to grant him permission to speak. It doesn't spin like most planets do. One side of it always faces our sun, while the other is always in the darkness. Because of this, there's a sharp difference in temperature between the two sides of the planet, which results in strong winds on the surface. During 1 month of the year, though, Eldingvega orbits closer to our sun than it usually does, and so the temperature on Sulcid, the light side, is even hotter than usual. The temperature difference becomes more drastic, so the resulting winds are far more dangerous than they usually are. While the winds are blowing, no ships can enter or leave the atmosphere, or else they'll be torn apart. But sometimes the winds can die down completely for a few hours or so. Thus, we were able to use one of those windows to make our escape. And I presume Dream also took advantage of one of those no-wind periods to launch his invasion? Sam asked, looking at Wilbur now. Wilbur nodded. Arrett informed him when there was going to be a no-wind period, so he was able to get his ship safely in the atmosphere and land right before the winds picked up again. Which also lowered the risk of anyone escaping. Technoblade huffed, seeming frustrated. Smart, I'll give him that. And fucking barbaric, Tina cursed, scowling deeply. He didn't even give Eldingvegar a fighting chance. Dream plays dirty. This isn't a secret to anyone, Philza said, his wings ruffling again. That's true, but I'll admit, I still wouldn't have expected him to make a move this bold. Sam cut in. Did he really think that the rest of the galaxy would be perfectly fine with him taking over Eldingvegar? Of all planets? That man's an idiot, Tina huffed. He's a damn good strategist, though, Michael pointed out. Not in the long run. Here we are, already having a summit to discuss what we're going to do about this. I'm sure dozens of other planets are doing the same thing right now, Ponk said, fiddling with their metal fingers. If his strategy was to try and find out how to piss off the entire galaxy at once, yeah, he's done a great job of that. But I don't get how he thought this could turn out well in the long term. In the long term. I still don't know Pong's accent that well, so forgive me. Philza rolled his neck, wincing when it made a loud cracking sound. He probably assumed that he could force anyone who disagreed with the move into submission through denying them access to Blazophane. Wait, speaking of forcing someone into submission, has Themis spoken up about this yet? Aunt Frost asked, and Wilbur almost jumped at the mention of the planet. Like, I know they usually stay out of the rest of the galaxy's business, but this has to be big enough to warrant some kind of reaction. Technoblade let out a measured breath through his nose. You'd think that, but Themis hasn't said a single thing about the takeover. Suddenly, Philza turned so he was facing Wilbur. Prince Orpheus, you were being trained as an advisor for Prince Theseus. Were you aware of what Elding Vega's relationship with Themis was? Tommy's nails dug into his palm, and it took all of Wilbur's willpower not to wince. Can you be more specific? Philza narrowed his eyes. I presume Elding Vega was selling Blazophane to Themis, is that correct? Elding Vega sells Blazophane to just about every planet in the galaxy. I'm asking about Themis, Prince Orpheus. Philza cut him off, his tone bordering on impatient. Annoyance flared in Wilbur's chest. And if you'd let me finish speaking, then I'd tell you that we sell Blazophane to every planet in the galaxy, including Themis. His words were sharp, far sharper than they should have been. But he was sick and tired of being cut off, and if Philza was going to ask him a question like that in front of all of those other leaders, he should have at least had the damn courtesy to let him finish his sentence. Philza, as always, didn't seem bothered by his abrupt tone. Instead, he just nodded. That's what I figured. Are you aware of how much Blazophane you provided them with? Was it the same amount you'd send off to the other planets of similar standing, or was it more? It's rather presumptuous of you to assume that I would freely give away information about my planet's relationship with another planet like that, Wilbur said, ignoring the way Tommy was tugging his hand under the table, clearly trying to get him to shut up, especially regarding a planet as powerful as Themis. It was petty. God, he was being so petty and he knew it. But it was so satisfying to watch frustration flicker across Phil's face. It was only there for a moment before his cool, unbothered mask slipped back over his features, but Wilbur saw it. But then, a different expression bloomed across Phil's face. The realization dawned in his eyes, and something like dread curled around Wilbur's lungs as that sharp smile returned. Themis and Elding Vega have a close relationship then, huh? He asked, victory dancing in his gaze. Wilbur clenched his jaw. You wouldn't have gotten so defensive if they were just another one of the many planets you sold Blazophane to, Philza pointed out. Even though he wasn't laughing, Wilbur could hear the way the mockery was wrapped around each of his words. Not to mention, I didn't ask about Elding Vega's relationship with Themis. I simply asked how much Blazophane you sold them. Shit. Fuck. Wilbur was an idiot. He let his pettiness get the better of him for just a moment, and he fucked up as a result. Phil, I don't think we need to be pushing the boys for information on Elding Vega's political relations right now. Sam jumped in, narrowing his eyes at Philza. I was simply asking. They're going to be serving petite at dinner in about half an hour. Carl suddenly chimed in, still staring off into space. It smells so good. Everyone at the table exchanged confused glances, while Tina just sighed like she was used to this. Is this your way of telling me that you're hungry? Philza asked, raising an eyebrow at Carl. I mean, I wouldn't mind going to get some food, Amphros muttered, wringing his hands in his lap. God, that's the first good fucking idea someone's had all day, Schlatt said, apparently having woken up from his nap. I'm way too jet-lagged for all this shit right now. Looking like he was fighting against the urge to scowl at Schlatt, Philza instead tapped his claws against the table. All right. We can reconvene in the morning if you're all alright with that. There was a murmur of agreement around the table, and Wilbur breathed a sigh of relief. The others began to get out of their seats, and Wilbur had to take a moment to collect himself as Tommy disentangled their fingers. Before Wilbur and Tommy could stand up, though, there was blonde hair in the corner of his eye. A chill ran up Wilbur's spine as Philza leaned next to his ear, whispering quietly enough that only Wilbur would be able to hear it. "You can do better than that, Dolpheus." And with that, Philza and Technoblade left the room as well. Okay, this will be brought up sooner, but in case it wasn't obvious, Carl is high on Okay, I figured that, but I didn't realize that that's how he sees the future. Carl is high on shrooms, which is how he sees the future. Wait, another thing I thought would be funny, J Texas Schlatt. In case you weren't aware, in Dune, which again this isn't an AU of, but it is inspired by, there's a character named Duncan Idaho, even though it takes place in space like tens of thousands of years into the future. Well, that's funny. Alright, another chapter done. Man, I am so glad that CPK only had like one sentence, because I do not know CPK's voice, and I don't know Ponk's either, in case you couldn't tell. Excuse me. Alright. I think that is going to be my stream. Let's see if there's anybody we can raid. God, my voice is sore. Oh. Well, this looks interesting. Let's raid a good friend of mine, Froggle. Alrighty. Thank you guys so much for watching. I am going to probably make popcorn and watch a Studio Ghibli movie. Froggle is doing a D&D campaign, I think, so be sure to give them some support. And as I don't know, I might stream tomorrow, who knows, but I might just be quirky and not. At the very latest, stream on Saturday. Alright. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.